All right, we are on a live stream. You can get started when you're ready.
So we just received the message to get started. So let's call the case of Stevie Rogers versus Drew Mars. My name is Judge Madhu Swarna. Scoring judges, make sure to look at the two buttons on the lower left of your screen and remember to keep your audio and video off unless the bailiff tells you otherwise. You should also have your video to set to hide all non-video participants. This means that the only two people that should be on the screen right now is the two advocates, Plaintiff Bailey Brown and Defense Katie Burdett, and myself. Can the attorneys please make appearances before the court?
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Bailey Brown, and I'll be representing my client, Stevie Rogers. My co-counsel at this moment is having some slight video connectivity issues that he's trying to work out.
Sure.
Good morning, Your Honor. Excuse me.
Good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Katie Burdett, and today I'm joined by my co-counsel, Mr. Harsha Sridhar.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
And we will be representing the defendant, Ms. Drew Mars, today.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning. All right, are there any pretrial matters that need to be addressed before we begin?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff would like to make sure you have access to the bench book.
Yes, I do. And if you see me looking off to the side, it is because I'm looking at the bench book and the rules of evidence.
We'd also like to invoke Rule 615, sequestering all witnesses that aren't party representatives. In this case, we'd like to designate Stevie Rogers to be our party representative.
Granted. Defense, do you have a party representative?
Yes, Your Honor. Our party representative will be Ms. Drew Mars.
Okay, granted.
The plaintiff has no other pretrial matters.
Defense, any pretrial matters?
Yes, Your Honor, a few more. We'd also like to invoke Rule 603, which calls for the constructive pre-swearing of all witnesses.
That is granted.
Yes, Your Honor. We'd also ask that when introducing exhibits to try and show them to the witness to establish the authenticity, that we be allowed to share them on screen constructively outside the presence of the jury until they've been admitted due to some of the unconventional natures of today's trial.
Of course, granted.
Yes, Your Honor. With that, the defense is ready to proceed into openings.
All right, so we'll hear opening statements from each party. Everyone should make sure that they're in speaker view. That button is in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Attorneys, please make sure to mute your audio when the other attorney is speaking. I'm also going to turn off my video for the statement portion and will return during the examinations. So plaintiff, whenever you're ready to proceed.
She was murdered for her money. There's only one person in today's case who benefited from the death of Agatha Lee. Drew Mars. Drew Mars, the defendant in today's case, was Miss Lee's caretaker and at-home nurse for 10 years. She was also the sole beneficiary of her entire estate, including her $20 million fortune and the rights to her book, Death in a Bottle. On the morning of August 15th, Drew Mars found Miss Lee dead in her bed. But she did not die peacefully in her sleep. She was murdered for her money. On August 14th, just a day before her death, the defendant overheard a conversation between Miss Lee and her grandson, Stevie Rogers, about changing the will, removing the defendant from it, and allowing Stevie Rogers to return to be the sole heir of the fortune. Moments later, the defendant watched as Miss Lee called up her personal attorney to schedule a new meeting to change that will. And as soon as that call finished, the defendant drove to a pharmacy where she picked up the pills she used to kill Agatha Lee. As the plaintiff in today's case, we have to prove that the defendant knowingly and purposely killed Agatha Lee by a preponderance of the evidence. This just means that we have to show it was more likely than not that the defendant knew what she was doing could have killed Miss Lee and did end in Miss Lee's untimely death. We'll do this by showing you that only the defendant had the knowledge, access to the means, and a motive. You'll learn today that the defendant was aware of the medication that Miss Lee was taking, that she was aware of Miss Lee's allergy to chlorandramine and of the severity of that allergy. You'll learn that the defendant knew that chlorandramine could be found in the form of common heartburn medication in any local pharmacy. Today, you'll also hear from Stevie Rogers, Agatha Lee's grandson. He'll tell you that the defendant was the only person other than Miss Lee to regularly touch her pillbox. And that on the night of August 14th, Stevie Rogers saw the defendant sneak into Miss Lee's empty room and walk out holding something in her hand. 2 pills. The Winterin pills she swapped for the chlorandramine. Today, you'll also hear from Mercer Bond, a private investigator that worked closely with the detectives in this case. Mr. Bond will tell you that it was the defendant's fingerprints they found on the bag that had the chlorandramine bottle. And that on August 14th, the defendant knew she was the sole inheritor of the will. But just 6 days later, during the will reading, she lied about knowing. Agatha Lee was murdered for her money, and the defendant is the only person who had the knowledge, the means, and a motive. At the end of trial today, my co-counsel, Mr. Kevin Lynch, will ask you to find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. Statement from the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. It was murder, but it wasn't Mars. On August 15th of 2018, Drew Mars walked into the room of a woman she had cared for over 10 years, Miss Agatha Lee. Miss Lee wasn't moving. She wasn't breathing. Panicked, Miss Mars sought help from the only other person living in that house, Miss Lee's estranged grandson, the plaintiff who had only shown up at her house a month prior. Today, you'll learn that the plaintiff's first reaction to learning that his only living family member was now dead wasn't shock. Instead, it was to hire a private investigator, and before that investigator even got there, before the autopsy, before the toxicology screening, the plaintiff was already accusing Miss Mars of murder. You see, members of the jury, it's pretty easy to be confident in what happened if you're the one who killed her. It was murder. And like Miss Brown said, it was murder for money. But it wasn't Mars. You'll learn today that it was the plaintiff. Today, you'll hear that the plaintiff arrived at Miss Lee's house a month prior with a single goal in mind: to get back in her grandmother's will. You see, the plaintiff had already blown through a $2 million trust fund, and now he had his eyes set on his grandmother's $25 million estate. And the evidence will show that when the plaintiff realized that his grandmother wasn't going to give him a single cent of that fortune, he had to get creative. He had to come up with a plan. You'll learn today that the plaintiff killed Miss Lee, and the plaintiff planted evidence and paid off an investigator to try and pin it all on Drew Mars. You may be wondering why. How would the plaintiff benefit from killing his grandmother? Well, you see, when Miss Lee decided to cut her grandson out of the will, she decided to make Miss Mars, her living caretaker, the sole heir to that $25 million fortune. Miss Mars is the only thing standing between the plaintiff and the money the plaintiff so desperately wants. In order for the plaintiff to get that money, he has to have his grandmother's will overturned. And that brings us to today, to the final step in the plaintiff's plan. You see, there's a law in Midlands called the Slayer Statute. You see, the plaintiff was familiar with this law long before today's legal proceedings. Well, this law states as if you kill someone, you can't receive any part of their estate. So the plaintiff's plan, well, you'll learn it's simple. The plaintiff has to prove that Miss Mars knowingly or purposefully caused the death of Miss Lee. And then the plaintiff can have Miss Lee's will overturned and get that $25 million. But you'll see the plaintiff today won't be able to meet their burden. Unlike what Ms. Brown said, they won't be able to prove the knowledge, means, or motive. Because it was murder, but it wasn't Mars. We, as the defense, we don't have a burden of proof. But we will be able to prove to you those three things, or not prove, Your Honor, but show you those three things that the plaintiff won't be able to. We'll be able to show you that the plaintiff had the knowledge, the means, and the motive by calling two witnesses. First, you're going to hear from Drew Mars, Miss Lee's living caretaker of over 10 years. She'll tell you about her relationship with Miss Lee, that the two of them were as close as family. She'll also tell you about a conversation she overheard on August 14th, the day Miss Lee was poisoned, between the plaintiff and his grandmother, in which Miss Lee told the plaintiff that he wasn't going to get a single fortune of that estate. You'll learn today that the plaintiff knew Miss Lee was deathly allergic to chlorandramine, and that he had access to her medication. He had the knowledge, the access, and the motive, not Miss Mars. You'll learn that 24 hours after this conversation, Miss Lee was found dead. And you'll learn that from the moment her body was found, the plaintiff was insisting that Drew Mars was responsible. Next, you're going to hear from Mr. Ryan Cabrera, Miss Lee's a biographer who had frequent contact with her in the months before her death. He'll tell you the plaintiff's claims that the defendant was going to get removed from the will and replaced with the plaintiff. Well, that just doesn't line up with what Mr. Cabrera was told by Miss Lee. Members of the jury, today you'll learn that the plaintiff orchestrated his grandmother's death and tried to pin it all on Drew Mars to get that $25 million. Today, the plaintiff will tell you a story about murder, about knowledge, about access, about motive. And we agree it was murder. But it wasn't Mars. You'll learn today that it was the plaintiff who had the knowledge, the plaintiff who had access, and the plaintiff who had the motive. That's why at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, Mr. Harsha Sridhar, will stand before you and ask that you find for Drew Mars. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Before we turn to our first witnesses, I'd ask everyone to switch to gallery view. It's the same button that you clicked on for speaker view. And this will allow you to see the attorneys and the witnesses at the same time. So plaintiff, if you're ready to call your first witness.
The plaintiff calls Stevie Rogers.
You may proceed.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
Of course, my name is Stevie Rogers.
What do you do for a living, Mr. Rogers?
In memory of Nana, I wanted to finish the 2 novels I was working on. I only thought it was fair. For me, writing these novels is what keeps my memory of her alive. It's pretty much the only link I have with her since she passed away.
Just to be clear, who is Nana?
Oh, I'm sorry. Nana is Agatha Lee. She's my grandmother.
Mr. Rogers, what's your education?
I have a bachelor's in communication from Sawyer Shaw University. I tried to get through law school for a while, but I guess it wasn't meant to be. I dropped out of law school after the 2nd year.
Why did you drop out?
Stress got to me. I realized I was just digging my head in my work to postpone the thought of dealing with the pain of my parents passing away. As soon as I figured that out, I dropped out and started living for myself.
What did you do after you dropped out?
I tried to drown my sorrows in a good time. I took up writing. I guess it runs in the family.
Did you keep in touch with your grandma during this time?
Oh, yeah, while she was in Alabama, I did, but it was a lot harder when she moved away. I know how this might sound, but after I had that epiphany in law school, I kind of wanted to be away from everyone. I didn't want anyone reminding me of my parents, and Nana was so much like my mom. It hurt not to speak to her often, but well, she didn't make it easy to see her either.
Why?
Well, she never really told me where she moved after she left Alabama. Nana was she was eccentric. She liked to bring her mystery novels to life. She would leave clues about where she moved, like a treasure hunt.
Did you ever complete this treasure hunt and learn where she moved to?
Well, I didn't specifically. The clues proved too much for me, but I heard about this legend of a private investigator, and I hired him to find her.
What did you do when you found her?
Well, I had realized how much I missed her. I wanted to rekindle my relationship, and I asked if I could move in.
What was it like living with your grandmother again?
Oh, I didn't realize how much I missed her wit and her energy. It felt like I was a kid again, back when everything was, better. We would spend whole days together playing backgammon.
Was there anyone else living in the house with you?
Unfortunately, yes. Her caretaker, Drew Mars.
What was your relationship like with Drew Mars?
Well, when I first got there, Mars kept asking when I would be leaving. I would understand if Mars asked once and left it alone. But every week, I would get a question like, how long do you plan to stay? I mean, I didn't understand. It was my grandma. I grew up in that house. And I felt like Mars was pressuring me to leave.
Did you know who Miss Lee was planning on leaving her fortune to?
The last time she told me she was changing her will was the morning of August 14th. Over breakfast, she talked about how she was going to speak to her lawyer to write me into the will.
Did the defendant, Drew Mars, hear Miss Lee say this?
Drew was hovering right outside the door when I opened it. He was glaring at me with clenched fists, and his face was all red and eyes glaring, and he mouthed the words, "No way" to me. It seemed like he heard everything.
I'd like to talk to you about the night before August 15th. What happened?
That was the night Anna was murdered.
Let's start from the beginning. What time did you last see your grandmother?
Around 9:30 p.m., I said goodnight to her in her study.
Did you stay in your room all night?
No, not really. I went downstairs for a drink.
When you went downstairs, did you see anyone?
Yeah. As I was walking down the flight of stairs, I looked over to my left and I saw Drew Mars, and she was kind of tiptoeing towards Nana's bedroom, holding something in her hand like this.
Your Honor, may the record reflect this witness held his hand in an upward fist motion?
The record will reflect that.
Do you know where your grandma was at this time?
Yeah, the light was on in her study, and when her light's on in her study, she's always there working on her new novel that she'd never published, by the way. But I know she hadn't gone to bed yet. She was probably still in her study.
Mr. Rogers, when you saw the defendant, Drew Mars, sneaking into your grandma's room, holding something in her hand, what did you do?
I just went to bed. I mean, I didn't know what was in her hand. If I had known, I would have stopped her then. But at the time, I didn't think anything of it.
What happened in the morning of August 15th?
Drew Mars woke me up in the morning and told me that my grandma had died in her sleep.
What did you do?
I immediately ran to see her. I couldn't believe she was gone. I checked her pulse and immediately started to break down. I couldn't feel anything. I was in shock, I guess.
Mr. Rogers, what happened next?
Well, Mars didn't call anyone for help. So as soon as I pulled myself together, I called Mercer Bond for help and 911. I mean, just before she'd been laughing about me, how she beat me at backgammon for the third time in a row. And I needed to know how my grandma died.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. No further questions, Your Honor.
Defense cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Before we begin, I just want to note as a matter of order that because of an internet issue here, I was unable to hear basically anything except for the first 5 questions of that direct examination. We notified the bailiff, of course, and the tournament committee, and we're back online now. I just wanted that on the record.
Of course.
And may I proceed?
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Rogers, can you see and hear me okay?
Yeah, I can see and hear you fine. Thank you.
Now, you've talked about what you think Drew Mars did on August 14th, 2018, and now I want to talk about you.
Sure.
Your grandmother died of an allergic reaction to a drug called chloroandramine, right?
That's right. That's what I remember from the toxicology report.
Well, you
It
actually
wasn't quite right, but it was something like that. Yeah.
That's right. You actually learned about that chloroandramine allergy in the first week of 2018, right?
That's right. I was having a conversation with Drew Mars, and Drew Mars told me that Nana was allergic to it.
She told you that that medicine could kill Agatha Lee, right?
That's what she told me. Yeah.
In that conversation, you also learned that chloroandramine is an over-the-counter drug, right?
From what you told me, yes, I remember that.
And that means that you can buy it at a pharmacy, right?
Yep.
You can buy it without a prescription.
Yes, that's correct.
And Mr. Rogers, 2 weeks after you learned that your grandma was deathly allergic to a drug you could buy over the counter, she was dead.
Yeah, that's right.
She was killed by that drug, chloroandramine,
That's right.
and she was killed in the same house where you were living.
That's correct.
Then I want to talk about where you were on August 14th, 2018. Now, you claim you were home all day, right?
Yeah, that's right. I was working on my novel. In the morning, I had breakfast with Nana, and then she headed out for lunch and came back a little bit later.
Well, sir, you say you were home all day, but you can't actually prove that, right?
No, I guess I didn't keep a record of how long I stayed in the house or when I left. That's correct.
You have a car, right?
Yes, that's right.
And there are pharmacies here in Midlands, right?
I'm sure there are. Yeah.
And you can't prove that you didn't drive your car to a pharmacy to pick up chloroandramine.
No, you're right. I can't prove that.
Well, sir, there were times that day when, as you say, you were home alone at Lee Manor.
That's correct. Yeah. Usually I am when Nana goes out. I don't have many friends in Midlands. I was working on it at the time, but unfortunately she passed away, and I'm not really living in Midlands anymore.
So, sir, that was a yes. You were home alone at times that day, right?
Oh, yes, that's right. I was home alone.
And let's talk about Lee Manor for a second. Now, you lived there for about 6 weeks, right?
That's right.
Like you told us, you didn't have very many friends, so you were spending a lot of time at the house.
I was working on the novel. That's right. Yeah.
And as far as you know, sir, there was only one door at that house that had a lock, and it was the door to Agatha Lee's bedroom.
From what I remember, yes. Yes,
So,
that's correct.
as far as you know, there was no lock that would stop you from entering Drew Mars's bedroom.
No, there's no lock that would stop me from entering that.
No lock that would stop you from putting a bag in Drew Mars's closet while you were home alone.
I mean, I guess hypothetically, you're right. Nothing would stop me from doing that.
Well, sir, there was something else you knew when you were home alone on August 14th, 2018. You knew that your grandmother, she took a number of medications, right?
Yeah, that's correct. She took a number of medications for her arthritis and her headaches and whatnot.
That's right, but Agatha Lee, she didn't pick out those medications out of pill bottles every day, right?
No, Drew Mars would collect all her medication and put it in a pill box.
Well, specifically, that's right. Drew Mars would put them in a pill organizer once a week.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, as far as you know, that pill organizer didn't have any sort of lock on it, right?
No, I don't think the pill organizer had a lock on it.
That's right. You'd actually seen it on your grandma's bedside table before.
Yeah, that's where she usually kept it. You're right.
And when you were home alone on August 14th, 2018, you knew that every night Agatha Lee took medicine from that pill organizer.
Yeah, she needed to take her medicine every day. So every day she took her medicine.
Sir, I want to talk about how you might gain financially from Miss Lee's death. Now, 5 days after Agatha Lee died, you actually filed this lawsuit, right?
That's correct. August 20th against Drew Mars.
August 20th, 2018. That's actually before your own private investigator finished his investigation, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's before the police concluded their investigation.
That's right. I mean, my grandma was in the prime of her health. She was fit, strong, healthy. She even cooked most of the time. I suspected foul play from the beginning.
Well, sir, not
Especially
just
when I found out that. Sorry, go on.
I want to be clear. You weren't just suspecting foul play. You were suing Drew Mars specifically for foul play, right?
That's absolutely right. Yes.
And you filed this lawsuit before the toxicology screen came back.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
Well, in your own words, sir, you knew exactly what that toxicology screen was going to show.
Right. I didn't think that my grandma up and died. I knew Drew Mars had to do something with it.
And this law that you're suing under, you were aware of it before Miss Lee died, right?
That's correct.
And you're claiming in this lawsuit that because you think Drew Mars killed Agatha Lee, you should get everything that Agatha Lee owned, right?
Look, this suit is more than that. It's about justice for my grandmother. The criminal case fell through on Drew Mars. As a civil suit, this is pretty much the only thing I can bring against him.
Well, sir, you're not
justice for my grandmother.
So you're not just suing for justice, right? You're suing for her estate.
I'm suing under the Slayer statute. My primary motivation is justice. This happens to be the civil suit I brought against Drew Mars. You're right.
So again, just to be clear, I'm not asking why you're suing, what your motivations were. Right now, I'm just asking what you are suing for, what you're asking for in this lawsuit. And in this lawsuit, you are asking for Agatha Lee's estate. Is that right?
I'm asking to have Drew Mars be guilty of murder or be held liable for murder. You're right.
So you understand that this isn't a criminal trial, right?
That's why I would like to have him held liable for murder.
And so that's a yes, you are suing for the estate.
Yes.
And then let's talk about your financial relationship with Agatha Lee. Now, back in 2008, Miss Lee told you she was making you the sole inheritor to her will, right?
That's correct.
And Your Honor, would it be all right if we put up a timeline?
Yes, go ahead.
Like you said, in 2011, you dropped out of law school, right?
That's right. I did after the second year.
And Miss Lee, she wasn't happy about that.
No, but to be honest, she never liked lawyers to begin with. She
That's
thought
right.
They were too slick by half.
She didn't like lawyers, but she wasn't happy that you dropped out of law school.
That's right.
Then I want to talk about this next 7-year period, 2011 to July 2018. Now, when Ms. Burdett and I deposed you, we asked you if your relationship with Agatha Lee was still closed after that, and you said yes, it was still a closed relationship. Is that right?
That's right. We were still close.
Now let's talk about exactly how close you were. Over the course of the next 7 years, you called Agatha Lee once.
Yep, that's right. I was traveling a lot during that time, and I really couldn't get reception many places. I came back in 2017 for a bit, and that's when I called my Nana for her birthday. You're absolutely right.
So you're saying over 7 years, you could just get reception to call her once, but she wrote you letters sometimes, right?
Right, but because I was traveling, I wouldn't necessarily receive them as soon as she would send them. I was out for most of the time. Like I said, after I had that epiphany, I kind of wanted to get away from everything, from everyone.
So in those 7 years, sir, you never wrote Agatha Lee a letter?
Yeah, that's right. I didn't. And she never sent a forwarding address to begin with. That was part of the treasure hunt I was saying earlier.
Well, sir, in those 7 years, you actually never held a regular job, right?
That's right. Like I said, I was traveling around the world.
And you were living off a $2 million trust fund.
Well, I had spent a little bit of it on law school, and you know how expensive that can be. But as far as the traveling goes, yes, I was living off of that trust fund.
In February of 2018, you received a letter from Agatha Lee, right?
That's correct. Yes.
You recognize that letter if I showed it to you?
Yes, I would recognize that letter.
Can we put Exhibit 10 up screen? This is that letter Miss Lee sent you, right?
Give me a second.
No problem.
Yeah, this is it.
It's a fair and accurate copy of the letter?
Yeah, that's her signature at the bottom.
At this time, Your Honor, defense moves Exhibit 10 into evidence.
Any objection from the plaintiff?
Objection to hearsay, Your Honor.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. The statements on this document fall under Rule 8033. They are statements both of intent and of motive. Now, in this document, Agatha Lee describes her intent to write the plaintiff out of her will, to disinherit the plaintiff. And the rest of the document is her explaining her justifications for doing that, explaining what motivated her. Thus, the entirety of the statement is actually a hearsay exception under Rule 8033.
Plaintiff, do you have a response to 8033?
Yes, Your Honor. While we understand the hearsay exception applies to the intents of Agatha Lee to write him out of the will, her justifications don't fall under that exception. Those should be redacted.
Your Honor,
Yes.
Rule 8033 explicitly allows for statements of motive. It's not just a rule for statements of intent. We're allowed to bring in statements that discuss the underlying motive, and that's what the rest of the letter is about.
Which specific parts talk about the motive?
Your Honor, if I could just get a little closer to the screen so I could read the document, just a second. Specifically, Your Honor, when Miss Lee says, I think I've done you a grave disservice, I've decided it needs to stop for the good of us, you've never had a job, and you're treating grandma as your own personal ATM to fund whatever pops into your head, you never visit, we've become family in name only. All of that describes the motive behind Miss Lee's decision to disinherit Stevie Rogers.
Plaintiff, one last response. What reason do you think that doesn't describe the motive? Because the rule does specifically list motive.
Well, to start, Your Honor, the first two paragraphs of the letter have nothing to do with the motive. The third paragraph was the one that the witness was referencing, or excuse me, counsel was referencing. And while it explains how Agatha Lee felt and why she came to her decision, the reason why she came to her decision isn't relevant at this point in time. The motivations for Agatha Lee writing this witness out of the will are irrelevant. Just the fact that they wrote them out of the will is the relevant part.
Well, I tend to agree that they are relevant to explain why. So unless there's another reason, I'm going to overrule and admit Exhibit 10.
Yes, Your Honor. And could we zoom into that fourth paragraph? Mr. Rogers, right here, Agatha Lee writes that you've become family in name only. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It was very unfortunate to hear that.
She says she's disinheriting you from the will.
Yeah, that's right. That's what she says.
Now, you said something interesting in your deposition when we asked you how you felt when you got this letter. You said you weren't thrilled, but you also weren't sweating it. Is that right?
That's correct.
Because you still had money left in that $2 million trust fund.
Right. I wasn't sweating the fact that she disinherited me from the will. Mostly I was upset because I had allowed the relationship to deteriorate at that point.
But again, the reason you weren't sweating it was you still had money left in the trust fund. Is that right, sir?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Let's talk about what happened in June of 2018. That's when the trust fund finally ran out, right?
Well, the bank account emptied. You're absolutely right. But I had a number of tangible assets I could have sold off to easily make that money back.
Right. But the actual trust fund account in June 2018, that was moved to $0, right?
No, that's incorrect. I had about $2,000 in there starting June 2018.
Sir, I just want to be clear. Is it your testimony that your trust fund did not run dry in June of 2018?
I believe that the June of 2018, I had about $2,000 in that account. If I'm not incorrect.
So you're testifying that your trust fund was not empty in June of 2018, sir?
I would say that, yes.
Your trust fund was empty or it wasn't? Just be clear for us here.
Just to be clear, I believe it was not empty.
All right. Do you remember making a deposition for this case?
I do, yes.
Do you have the deposition in front of you, sir?
I can pull it up right now.
All right.
Yes, I have it in front of me.
All right. I'll get it in front of me as well, sir. This is a fair and accurate copy of the deposition, right?
The one I have in front of me, yes, that's right.
It hasn't been changed or altered since you read it.
No, it hasn't.
Sir, can you turn with me to line 34?
Sure. Going down there right now. Yeah, I'm there.
I'll read silently as I read aloud. You were asked the question, when did the trust fund run out? Your answer was June of 2018. Is that correct?
That's correct. But I was more referencing the tangible assets I had.
So you were asked when your trust fund ran out, and it ran out in June of 2018.
Well, the bank account, yes, it did run out, if that was your question.
Well, sir, a month after that trust fund ran out, you moved in with Agatha Lee, right?
That's correct. Yes.
A month after that, you found out she was deathly allergic to chloroandramine.
That's correct. Yes.
And 2 weeks after that, Miss Lee was killed.
Yes, that's right.
Sir, you mentioned that you're suing for the value of this estate and your trust fund was empty. The value of this estate is $25 million. Isn't that right?
From what I remember, yes, it included her estate and the royalties off of her book. That's right.
Thank you, sir. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Plaintiff, redirect.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Rogers, let's get something clear. Did you ever leave the house on August 14th?
No, I had no reason to.
Have you ever touched your grandmother's pill case?
No, I had no business there.
Have you seen any of the medication your grandmother takes?
No, not really.
Have you ever heard of a pill called Winterin?
No.
Do you know if there's any physical similarities between a Winterin pill and a chlorhydramine pill?
Your Honor, at this point, I would object to this question being outside the scope of my cross-examination.
Response.
Your Honor, counsel targeted specifically whether or not this witness has access to the pill case and knows about the chlorhydramine pill. If this witness does not know that the chlorhydramine pill can be switched with the Winterin pill, the pill that Agatha Lee was taking, this witness does not have the knowledge to commit the crime.
I'm going to sustain that objection and strike. I don't believe the witness answered, but I will strike any response that might have been on the record.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Rogers, would you ever kill your grandmother?
Absolutely not. After I left in 2011, I realized that Nana was the only family I have left. I would never do anything to hurt her. And I would trade as much money in the world to just spend a few more days with her.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. No further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect or recross?
No,
Apologize.
no recross, Your Honor.
All right, the witness is excused. Plaintiff, call your next witness, please.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff would like to call Mercer Bond to the stand. I also want to apologize for being unable to be here during the introductions. Just want to say, my name is Ulysses Kevin Lynch. I'm also representing the plaintiff in today's case.
Of course. Nice to meet
And
you.
there's one other matter I'd like to deal with before we proceed with the direct examination. Because I'd like to ask the record reflect that because Officer Nora Khan is currently unavailable, in prior evidentiary rulings number 19 and 21, it was decided that because she's unavailable, her officer report has been pre-admitted, and both parties have agreed that Mr. Bond will be allowed to testify as to its contents.
All right, the record will reflect that. If there's anything else, feel free to proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Yeah, good morning. My name is Mercer Bond.
What's your line of work, Mr. Bond?
I'm a private detective and run a firm of national pedigree. I deal in one thing alone, finding the truth.
Well, how long have you been a private detective, sir?
It's been nearly 20 years, and well, if the good Lord wills it, I'll be doing it another 20.
So how'd you get involved in this case?
I was retained by Mr. Stevie Rogers to investigate the untimely departure of his grandmother, the world-renowned Agatha Lee.
When did Mr. Rogers retain you?
He called me at 8:45 a.m. on August 15th, 2018, asking me to come to Lee Manor immediately.
So when did you get there?
I got there within the hour at 9:25 a.m. To offer my condolences and start the investigation.
Well, how exactly did you go about starting that investigation?
I entered the premises looking for anything out of the ordinary and made my way upstairs to speak to Mr. Rogers, and that's also where I met Drew Mars.
Well, when you spoke with Mr. Rogers, did Mr. Rogers provide you with any information which was helpful to your investigation?
Yes, sir, he did. He spoke to me about Agatha Lee's will.
What did he say about this will?
He told me that Agatha Lee had named Drew Mars, well, that's her caretaker, as the sole beneficiary of her estate, and that he suspected Mars had killed Agatha to prevent her from changing the will.
Well, how did that information from Mr. Rogers contribute to your investigation?
Well, that left me with one burning question that needed to be answered. Did Miss Mars know that she was the sole beneficiary of Agatha's estate?
Were you able to answer that question?
I was.
Well, how'd you do that?
Well, you see, I got the chance to search Miss Mars's laptop and actually found an email where Mars spoke about the will in detail.
Well, Ms. Brown, could you pull up Exhibit 13 for us? I ask that this be constructively shown only to the court, not to the members of the jury. Sir, is this a fair and accurate depiction of that email as you found it?
It looks to be. Would you mind zooming in just a little bit? My eyes are not that good.
Thank you, Ms. Brown.
Thank you.
Your Honor, motion to admit this into evidence at this time.
Any objections?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, it's admitted.
And permission to display this to the members of the jury.
Granted.
Now, just a minute ago, Mr. Bond, you told us that you were trying to answer the question of whether or not Drew Mars knew that she was in this will.
That's right.
What does this email say?
Well, if you see there, it's that second line. Miss Mars says that Agatha left her everything. She would get every last penny.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. You can take that down. Did Miss Mars ever say to you that she knew she was in the will?
Well, no. I mean, actually, she said the exact opposite at the reading of Miss Lee's will. There, Miss Mars said she had no idea that she would inherit everything.
When exactly did Miss Mars say that she had no idea she would inherit everything?
Well, that was Monday, August 20th, around 10 o'clock in the morning, 5 days after Agatha had passed.
Well, in that email where Ms. Mars said that she did know she was in the will, when exactly was that dated, sir?
Well, that was February 18th, 2018, over 4 months before Agatha Lee died. Over 4 months before she said she had no idea.
So, Mr. Bond, what was the next step in your investigation?
I haven't found a plausible motive. I wanted to investigate Agatha Lee's real cause of death.
How'd you go about doing that, sir?
I spoke to Miss Mars. It was her caretaker, and I wanted to see what Miss Lee's health was throughout the duration of her employment.
Well, what did Ms. Mars say about Miss Lee's health?
She specifically mentioned that Miss Lee suffered from an extremely rare fatal allergy to an over-the-counter drug. It's called chlorandramine.
Well, do you know if a toxicology screen was done on Miss Lee after she died?
Yes, indeed. I was the one to implore the investigating detective, that was Miss Cohn, to request a toxicology from the coroner's office. And I tell you what, I am now surprised by the result.
Well, did you read Detective Kahn's report, Exhibit 6?
I did, yes.
Did that drug, which Miss Lee was fatally allergic to, did that show up in that toxicology screen?
Yes, the autopsy concluded that Miss Lee did not die of natural causes, but due to a fatal ingestion of chlorandramine.
Did you and Officer Khan ever search Lee Manor?
Yes, we did. Immediately after the toxicology report came back, detectives were scouring the entire estate, and thankfully they brought me along.
Well, did you find anything of importance to your investigation?
There were three items that stood out to me. The first was a pill organizer. The second, well, that was a bottle of wintering pills, and the third was a black medical bag.
Let's walk through all three pieces of evidence. Starting with that first one that you mentioned, the pill organizer. Where'd you find that?
The pill organizer, that was found on Miss Agatha Lee's bedside table.
Ms. Brown, could you pull up Exhibit 12? Is this a fair and accurate copy of, or a fair and accurate picture of that pill organizer as you found it?
Yes, sir. If you see, Sunday through Tuesday, they're empty. And Wednesday through Saturday, they'll still have pills in them for obvious reasons.
Motion to admit Exhibit 12, Your Honor.
No objection.
All right, it's admitted.
Did you ever find out? Well, I see that in each one of those capsules, Wednesday through Saturday, there are a pair of small purple pills. Did you ever find out what pills those were?
Yes, sir. Those small purple pills in there, where toxicology confirmed that those were wintering. It's a type of arthritis medication.
Let's move on to that second piece of evidence, which you mentioned, a bottle of wintering pills. Where'd you find those?
The bottle of wintering pills, those were found in Agatha Lee's bathroom.
Well, how'd you know that those pills were wintering?
Well, again, the pills in the bottle came back from the toxicology screen as matching wintering.
So why exactly was that bottle of wintering pills important to your investigation?
For fingerprints. Officer Cohn ran a fingerprint analysis on the pills in the bottle. Two of the wintering pills, the same as a daily dose, well, that matched Drew Mars's fingerprints.
I'd like to ask you about that third piece of evidence which you mentioned,
Sure.
that black bag.
Mhm.
What was in it?
When we found the black bag, it contained a box of cigarettes and another bottle of pills. Now, this is where it gets interesting. The pills were identical to the wintering pills in the other bottle in size and in color, that purple color. But Officer Cohn's testing revealed that those pills were actually chlorandramine.
Well, that bag in which the chlorandramine pills were found, was it ever dusted for fingerprints?
Yes, sir. Everything was dusted for fingerprints, and according to the analysis done, the only fingerprint found was on the zipper of that bag. It didn't match Drew Mars.
And can you tell the members of the jury where exactly you found that black bag?
It was tucked away inside Drew Mars's closet.
Thank you, Mr. Bond. I've got no further questions.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Bond. I have a few more questions for you. Can you see and hear me all right?
I can hear you just fine.
Great. Now, Mr. Bond, you are a private detective, right?
Yes, ma'am, I'm a private eye.
Your clients hire you to answer their questions, right?
They hire me to help find the truth.
That's right. And your clients expect you to be able to find the truth for them, right?
Well, sometimes they don't like the truth I find, but I definitely find it.
All right. Well, I want to talk about a question that the plaintiff hired you to answer in today's case. At 8:45 a.m., the plaintiff called you on August 15th, right?
That's right. He called me right after I'd finished my morning coffee.
And the plaintiff told you that someone had murdered his grandmother.
Yes, ma'am. He called me. He was bawling, and I told him, son, you need to get your stuff together. I can't hear you. And he said, I think my grandmother's been killed. I need you to get down here as soon as possible. I told him, don't worry, I'll be there in a minute.
So, Mr. Bond, that's a yes. The plaintiff told you his grandmother was murdered.
That's what he had thought. Yes, ma'am.
And the plaintiff hired you to figure out who killed her.
That's correct.
The plaintiff is paying you $25,000 to answer that question for him.
Yes, ma'am. He had paid me $25,000 for my services.
And the plaintiff paid you $25,000 despite the fact that the police were conducting their own simultaneous investigation.
Well, yes, ma'am. It's not uncommon for wealthier families to hire their own investigator in cases like this.
You got to Miss Lee's home at 9:25 a.m. The plaintiff told you he already thought he knew who did it, right?
Well, yes, ma'am. He said that only 3 people had lived in the house, and well, considering one of them had deceased, that left one other individual in the house.
So when you got there at 9:25 a.m., the plaintiff told you that he was convinced the caretaker, Drew Mars, was responsible for Miss Lee's death.
Well, that's right. Though as soon as I got there, I wasn't sure if it was a murder, to be honest with you.
That's right. When you first got there, it looked like Miss Lee died from natural causes, right?
That's what it appeared to be, but I did suspect foul play.
And despite the fact that it looked like Miss Lee died from natural causes, the plaintiff was still insisting Drew Mars was responsible.
He wanted me to look into the situation. Yes, ma'am.
And 8 days later, you completed your investigation.
Around 8 days later, yes, ma'am.
And at the end of all your investigation, you decided that you agreed with your client, the plaintiff.
Well, no, ma'am, that's not correct. The facts agreed that Drew Mars had the access and the means to kill Agatha Lee.
And that agrees, well, what you claim agrees with what the plaintiff initially thought, right?
Again, ma'am, yes, the facts did support what he had claimed.
I actually want to talk about that evidence that you say the police collected that you talked about a few moments ago.
Of
I
course.
actually want to start with that black bag.
The black bag, yes, ma'am.
That black bag was, you said, found in Miss Mars's closet.
Yes, it was between 2 blankets, like heavy blankets that you put on a bed.
But to be clear, that bag was found 7 days after Miss Lee's death.
Yes, ma'am.
Miss Mars would have had plenty of time to get rid of that bag if it was hers, right?
That's a possibility, but you have to understand, murderers make mistakes.
Oh, Mr. Bond, you mentioned that there was one fingerprint on that bag.
Well, not exactly, no. There was one usable fingerprint where you can get a 16-point match.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's exactly right. There was only one usable fingerprint belonging to Drew Mars on that bag.
Yes, it was on the zipper of the bag.
That fingerprint was on the outside of that bag.
Yes, how you'd hold the bag and open it.
The police, they didn't find any of Drew Mars's fingerprints on the inside of that bag.
No, ma'am, just on the outside.
They didn't find any of Drew Mars's fingerprints on that bottle of chloroangemine inside that bag.
That is correct.
And like you mentioned, it wasn't the only fingerprint on that bag.
Yes, ma'am.
There were plenty of other smudges on that bag that weren't usable.
Yes, it was a well-used bag.
That's right, and you have no idea whose fingerprints those were.
No, ma'am, the only one we pulled belonged to Drew Mars.
Mr. Bond, as far as you're aware, those fingerprints that couldn't be identified, they could have belonged to the plaintiff.
Ma'am, you could hypothetically state that. However, the only usable fingerprint belonged to Drew Mars.
All right. Well, now I want to talk about that burning question you mentioned earlier about Drew Mars knowing about this whole estate. You
Yes,
also, excuse me, Mr. Bond, you also thought it was important whether or not Drew Mars knew that there was a possibility she might be removed from the will.
every fact is important.
Actually, Mr. Bond, in your own words, without that missing link, you would say the case against her crumples.
Well, yes, ma'am, you need to find a plausible motive. That's why it was strange that Drew would have lied about knowing about the will.
You claim that this motive involved Miss Mars overhearing a conversation between Agatha Lee and the plaintiff about that will.
That's what I was informed about when asking about the events that occurred that week, yes.
Mr. Bond, you believe a key part of this motive is that Drew Mars overheard a conversation in which Miss Lee told the plaintiff that the plaintiff was going to get all this money.
Plaintiff, Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
But to be clear, this conversation, well, you don't have any recordings of it?
No, ma'am, I don't believe grandchildren record their conversations with their grandparents.
You don't have any witnesses besides the plaintiff who claimed to have overheard this conversation?
That's correct.
The only evidence you have that this conversation ever happened is what the plaintiff, your client, told you.
That conversation occurred? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. We ask that Mr. Bond be allowed to step down.
All right, Mr. Bond, you're excused.
Good day.
Anything
With that-
further from the plaintiff?
At this point, Your Honor, the plaintiff closes its case in chief, and we request a brief recess before moving on to the defense's case in chief.
All right, so we'll take a 5-minute break. Judges, please remember that this video is being broadcast via the YouTube live stream, so just be careful with what's happening and what you're saying on the screen. We'll see you all at 11:54.
Now I'm opening up breakout rooms for the competitors. Hey, judges, that's a 1-minute warning. All right, judges, when you get a chance, can you turn on your videos just so we can confirm that everyone's back, and then I'll bring back the competitors. One, two, three, four, five, six. All right. Is this everybody?
It looks like there's still one non-video participant.
Yeah, we're still waiting on Brian.
Sorry, I'm still here. You're waiting on me?
Oh, yep, you're here. Awesome. All right, I'm gonna go. You guys
I
can
did have
turn.
a comment if it's all right
Oh,
at
sure.
this point. I believe from the judge's orientation setting, there was a bullet point on one of the slides that said that the scope of cross is not limited to direct.
Yes.
All right, I thought that that came up as one of the objections, and I wasn't sure if
For recross.
for recross. All right, thank you.
All right, judges, you can go ahead and turn off your videos. And I'll bring the students back. All right, all of the judges are here. Presider, the courtroom is yours.
If everyone's back and ready to go, defense, please call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Miss Drew Mars to the stand.
All right, Ms. Mars, you may proceed.
Please introduce yourself to the members of the jury.
Hi, I'm Drew Mars.
Why are you here?
I'm here today because Stevie Rogers is accusing me of poisoning his grandmother, Agatha Lee. Miss Lee left me her estate, and Stevie, he's suing me to get it back.
Did you poison Agatha Lee?
No, of course not. I mean, we spent so much time together. She was like a grandmother to me. She was family. I would never do anything like that. I could never.
Who is Agatha Lee?
I guess you could say Miss Lee, she was my boss. I mean, I was employed as her caretaker, but the day-to-day was a little more complicated than that. When I graduated from college, I moved straight in with her, and it's been like that ever since. I mean, we had 10 years together. Morning to night, we were together. I mean, we shared a life together.
Do you know if Miss Lee had any relatives?
Yeah, she had one grandson, Stevie Rogers.
During the 10 years you took care of Miss Lee, how often did you see the plaintiff?
Maybe once or twice before we left Midlands in 2011. But after that, I never saw Stevie around until he showed up in July of 2018.
Did the plaintiff ever talk to you about her relationship with the plaintiff? Or excuse me, Miss Lee, talk to you about her relationship with the plaintiff?
All the time. I mean, you could tell it really bothered her. She brought it up a lot. She told me how much it hurt her that she hadn't seen Stevie. She would send him emails. She would send him letters. She would call him, and he never responded. I mean, she told me it felt like she had lost a grandson.
Would you recognize a copy of a letter that Miss Lee sent the plaintiff in February of 2018?
I'm sure I would. I saw most of Miss Lee's letters before she sent them.
Could we please have Exhibit 10 on the screen? It's already been entered into evidence. Do you recognize this, Miss Mars?
Yes, it's the letter that Miss Lee sent Stevie in February of 2018.
Do you know why Miss Lee sent this letter?
I do. She felt that Stevie was family and name only now. And she said that she was sending this to let him know that she was removing him from her will.
If Miss Lee was removing the plaintiff from her will, do you know who she named to inherit her estate?
She named me.
Do you know why?
Well, for the past 10 years, it really had just been the two of us. And she was really grateful that I'd stayed in her life for that long, and she told me that. And like it says in this letter, I was with her through thick and thin. We really were just facing the world together, and she saw that.
How did you react when she told you you would be inheriting her estate?
It was a lot of emotions. I guess you could say shock. I mean, she already did so much for me. She gave me a place to sleep. She gave me food to eat. She took care of me. She gave me an education. I mean, she was already so generous. It felt like I didn't deserve any more generosity from her. But I also felt happy. I mean, you know, this showed how much she thought our relationship meant to her. And she meant a lot to me. And so I really appreciated that.
All right. I now want to talk about the morning of August 14th, 2018. We've heard a lot about that today. Did you ever hear Miss Lee and the plaintiff discuss her estate?
Yeah, I did. I was bringing Miss Lee her tea that morning. And as I got close to the study, I heard her talking to Stevie.
What did you hear?
I heard Stevie ask Miss Lee to reconsider her decision and put Stevie back into the will.
What did Miss Lee say?
She said no.
Did she say anything more than that?
She said she loves Stevie and that she wanted to support him, but she thought he needed to stand on his own 2 feet. She said that she couldn't support his lifestyle anymore and she wasn't going to give him a penny.
Did you hear Miss Lee say anything else after that?
No. At that point, they both stood up to leave, and Miss Lee, she passed by me and she went to go get ready for her lunch with Ryan Cabrera. But Stevie, he stayed by the door. He waited there, and when he saw me, he glared at me and he said, "Don't count your millions yet."
After the plaintiff told you, "Don't count your millions yet," what did you do for the rest of the day?
I mean, after that, it was a pretty normal day. I cooked Miss Lee dinner like I normally do, and then her and Stevie took it in the study, and I went to sleep around 9:30 that night, like usual.
What happened the next morning?
Well, I went into Miss Lee's room like I normally do every morning at 8:30 to bring her coffee. But when I got in there, she wasn't awake, so I tried to wake her up. I shook her a little bit, but she didn't wake up. So I checked her pulse, and there was nothing. I was in shock. I knew I had to tell Stevie, so I ran to Stevie's room. I knocked on his door. I told him how I had found Miss Lee, and he came back with me, and he called 911. But when the police got there, he accused me of killing her.
Miss Mars, we've talked about what you were doing on the day of August 14th.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about what you knew about the plaintiff that day.
Okay.
To your knowledge, do you know if the plaintiff was aware Miss Lee was deathly allergic to chloroandramine?
I do, because I specifically told him. I mean, since Miss Lee had such a severe allergy to the medicine, I told him that we didn't have any of it in the house, and that I told him how bad the allergy was.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. We're not using these statements for the truth of the matter asserted. We've already heard this come into evidence. We're using this for effect on the listener, specifically Stevie Rogers, the plaintiff. The fact that we're using this to show the fact that Miss Mars told the plaintiff about this allergy and that the plaintiff would have been aware of it, that's what we're using the statement for.
So it's effect on listener or?
Effect on listener, Your Honor.
Response from the plaintiff?
Your Honor, in that case, it is being offered the truth of the matter asserted. We ask for a limiting instruction that it only goes to the effect on the listener.
Well, for effect on listener, what is the actual effect that you're eliciting? Why do we need this statement in order to get to that, if that's the purpose? Because the limiting instruction won't really do much.
Yes, Your Honor. The effect is that the plaintiff was under the impression that Miss Lee was deathly allergic based on what the defendant told you. Now, the plaintiff has already admitted that today. We've already heard that this allergy, that she did have a deathly allergy. So we don't need to use the statement to prove it. That's already in evidence. What we're using it for is to show that the plaintiff heard it and that the plaintiff would have been under this impression.
So it's going towards whether the plaintiff was on notice?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. If for that reason, then I'll overrule.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Mars, you were telling us about what you told the plaintiff about chloroandramine.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as Stevie showed up, I made sure to tell him how severe Agatha's allergy was to chloroandramine and that we didn't have any of it in the house. I told him that it was an over-the-counter medication, so he had to check every medication that he got from the pharmacy to make sure it didn't have it in it.
Ms. Mars, do you know if there are any locks on that would prevent someone from accessing Miss Lee's medication?
I don't know of any. Miss Lee left her bathroom door unlocked, and we were gone for parts of the day while Stevie was still at home.
Do you know if there are any locks that would prevent someone from entering your room or your closet?
I know there's no locks to that. I know there's no locks to my room, and the storage closet inside of it doesn't have a lock either.
Well, you've been in court all day, and I want to give you a chance to address some things we've heard. Were you here when Mr. Bond showed us a black bag that he said had your fingerprint on it?
Yeah, I heard him say that today, but that bag's not mine. I mean, he found it in a storage closet that Miss Lee used all the time. I mean, I don't even know half the stuff that was in there.
Do you know if you ever touched this bag?
I can't really say. I mean, Miss Lee asked me to get stuff from that closet from time to time, so I could have touched it when I was moving something to get to something else in that closet. It was kind of a mess.
Were you also here today when we heard about this will reading that occurred on August 20th? Could you tell us about your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, that was a few days after Miss Lee's death, and the whole time I'd been accused over and over again by Stevie. He just kept hammering me about it, and in that moment when they read the will, all eyes were on me, and I just felt overwhelmed. I didn't know what to do, and I made a split-second decision and pretended like I didn't know that Miss Lee was leaving me her estate. And obviously that was a bad decision, but in that moment, I just couldn't think. I just made a quick decision, and obviously it was wrong.
To your knowledge, what would happen to Miss Lee's estate if the plaintiff is successful with this lawsuit?
Stevie would get all of Miss Lee's estate instead of me. And the will that specifically excluded Stevie, that would get overturned, ma'am.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time.
Plaintiff, any cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Give me just one moment.
Of course, take your time.
Good morning, Ms. Mars.
Good morning. Good morning.
Now, you know that chloroandramine is a common heartburn medication.
Yes, it is.
You know what it looks like, right?
Yeah, it's just a small pill.
You would recognize a bottle full of chloroandramine if I showed it to you, wouldn't you?
I'm sure I would. I made sure not to have any of it in the house.
At this point, I'd like to ask my co-counsel to please put up Exhibit 13? Exhibit 17, excuse me. Miss Mars, do you recognize this bottle?
Yeah, it's the bottle of pills they showed me during my deposition.
And this is a fair and accurate copy of what they showed you, correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Your Honor, at this point, we ask to move Exhibit 17 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, so admitted.
At this point, we also ask to show Exhibit 17 to the members of the jury.
Granted.
Now, Miss Mars, this bottle was found in your closet, wasn't it?
Yeah, they told me they found it in that black bag. Like I said before, that bag wasn't mine. I'm not sure whose it was.
That wasn't quite my question, Miss Mars. This bottle was found in your closet.
Yes, like I said, it was in that bag in the closet.
Ulysses, at this point, can you please take down the exhibit? Miss Mars, you're also familiar with a drug called Winterin.
Yes, it was one of Miss Lee's medications. She took it every day.
You know that Miss Agatha Lee took 2 pills of Winterin every day.
Yes, that's correct.
You're the person that fills up Miss Lee's pill box every week, right?
Yeah, I was her caretaker.
Now, Winterin and chlorhydramine, they look exactly the same, don't they?
They do, and that's why we had to make sure when anything was bought from the pharmacy not to get anything with chlorandramine in it. We did not want it in the house.
That's right. You can find chlorandramine at pretty much any pharmacy.
Yes, that's why I warned Stevie to be super careful whenever he got a medication.
So that's yes. Chlorhydramine is in any pharmacy.
Yes, ma'am.
And Agatha Lee has a deadly allergy to it.
Yeah, it's what caused her heart attack back in 2008.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about your relationship with Miss Lee.
Okay.
You started working for her in 2008?
Yeah, right after that heart attack, and a year later I moved in with her.
So you've been living here with her for about 10 years, right?
Yeah, they were a good 10 years.
She paid you a salary every year, right?
Yeah, alongside room and board and even medical expenses. I mean, she was so generous to me. I can't repay her for that.
That's right, Miss Mars. Miss Lee covered your room and board?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
She covered your medical expenses?
Yeah.
She even paid for your education, didn't she?
Yeah. Again, it's insane.
Over those 10 years, Miss Lee was your only source of income.
Yeah, I mean, she was my employer, and she took care of me very well.
And when Miss Lee died, you lost that source of income.
I lost a lot more than a source of income. I lost my friend, the person I'd been living with for 10 years.
Wasn't quite my question, Miss Mars. When she died, you lost your only source of income. I'm just looking for a yes or no.
Yes, ma'am, I did.
But you were still included in her will, weren't you?
Yes, she did leave her estate to me.
You inherited over $20 million when Miss Lee died.
That's what I've been told, yes.
I'd like to take a step back a bit and talk to you about July of 2018.
Okay.
July of 2018, Stevie Rogers showed up in front of the house, right?
Yeah, it was the first time we saw him in so long. It was honestly like seeing a ghost.
Stevie Rogers is Agatha Lee's grandson.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
And Miss Lee, she spoiled her grandson, didn't she?
Yeah, I mean, from how much pain he caused her initially, you could tell how much she loved him, and she just tried to get close to him. So I gave them some space.
That's right. Miss Lee really loved her grandson. Wouldn't you say so?
She did, and she was glad that he was back in her life.
And when he moved back into the house with you, they started spending all of their time together.
I mean, yeah, they hadn't seen each other in like 8 years. I just tried to give them their space and let them do their thing. They obviously needed the time.
You no longer ate dinner with Agatha Lee, did you?
No, I didn't.
You no longer watched movies with Miss Lee?
Not as often, no, ma'am.
You no longer played backgammon with Miss Lee.
No, I didn't.
Stevie did.
Yeah, I mean, after the years I'd spent with her, I figured it was fair enough to give Stevie plenty of space to spend time with Miss Lee. They needed the time.
On the morning of August 14th, you heard Miss Lee and her grandson discuss changing the will, correct?
Yes, Stevie brought up and asked Miss Lee to reconsider putting him back into the will.
And on August 14th, you knew that you were the sole inheritor of her entire estate.
Yes, under her last will. That's correct, ma'am.
And on August 14th, less than an hour after hearing this conversation, you drove up to a pharmacy.
It was routine. I mean, I had just dropped off Miss Lee at lunch and I stopped by the pharmacy. I go a couple times a week and picked up some toiletries.
That wasn't quite my question. On August 14th, after hearing this conversation, less than an hour later, you stopped by a pharmacy. Yes or no?
Yes, like any other normal day.
Thank you, Ms. Mars. No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Miss Mars, Miss Brown just got up here and was asking you a few questions about how Miss Lee was so generous with you.
Yeah.
Now, was
Objection,
the
Your Honor. Attorney is testifying.
Sustained.
yes, Your Honor. Now, Miss Mars, why was Miss Mars the your only source of income?
Miss Lee was my only source of income because, I mean, I chose to work with her. I kept working with her and she paid me so well and took care of me. I didn't need anyone else.
Did you lack other opportunities?
No, I had plenty of people asking me to come and be their caretakers. I mean, word spreads pretty fast, but at that point, I was friends with her. I wanted to stay with her. Life with her was good. I miss her a lot.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Recross?
No recross, Your Honor.
All right. Ms. Mars, you're excused. And defense, if you'd like to call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. Defense calls Ryan Cabrera.
All right, Mr. Cabrera, you may begin.
Yes, Your Honor. Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hi, how are you? My name is Ryan Cabrera.
Where are you from, sir?
Originally, I'm from Boston, but I keep moving around a lot, partially because I keep getting evicted because my neighbors keep filing nuisance complaints against me, but also because of my job. I live in Midlands now, though.
What do you do for a living, sir?
Well, I write biographies, which usually means I'm asking other people what they do for a living, so I'm on the opposite side of that. It's a little odd, but you're doing a great job, Mr. Shredder. Keep it up.
Thank you. Who have you written about?
I've written about everybody. Heroes like Tom Brady before 2020, villains like Tom Brady after 2020. But my biggest project was about Agatha Lee. She was a famous author.
Well, how did you become Agatha Lee's biographer?
In 2015, I found out about her, how famous she was, and I sent her a letter asking if I could write a book. Like most women I talked to, she didn't respond to me right away or for 3 years. But then in February of 2018, she wrote me a letter, or people did, and they asked me to come over and write a book about her life.
How long did you work with Miss Lee?
I started in February of 2018 until August of 2018. We met every week. I never expected to become friends with an 82-year-old woman, but Agatha was pretty cool.
Who else was at Miss Lee's house when you'd go to visit her?
For the most part, for the first 5 months I was there, it was just this lady named Drew Mars. I think she was Agatha's babysitter, her nurse or something.
Well, then I want to talk about Miss Mars. What did you observe about her relationship with Agatha Lee?
I mean, to me at least, it seemed like they were close. I honestly thought Drew was Agatha's granddaughter at first. I mean, Agatha loved all this old people stuff, backgammon, shuffleboard, eating dinner at 4:30 p.m. And Drew did all of that with her. They were practically inseparable.
Then let's talk about what you know about Miss Lee's relationship with the plaintiff in those 5 months.
Sure.
Did you ever hear the plaintiff talking to Agatha Lee on the phone?
To her, no. I heard Agatha talk about her, complaining like my pa complains about me, but I never heard them talking to each other. No.
Did you see any emails or letters from the plaintiff to Miss Lee?
No, I didn't see that.
Did you ever get a chance to meet the plaintiff?
Yeah, I actually did. I walked in on July 6th to interview Agatha, celebrate a little 4th of July, you know. I saw Stevie sitting in the living room. I thought it was odd a little bit. I didn't know they'd been talking, but Agatha seemed pretty happy. She had a wide smile showing all her dentures and everything. It was nice.
Well, you say Agatha Lee seemed happy to have the plaintiff back in her life, but I just want to be clear.
Sure.
In the next few months, did you ever hear Miss Lee say she was planning on giving the plaintiff money?
No, I didn't hear that, no.
Did you ever hear Miss Lee say she wanted to write the plaintiff into her will?
Oh, nothing like that. Sorry.
When's the last time you met Agatha Lee, sir?
That was August 14th of that same year. I took Agatha out to lunch to interview her. Usually I take her somewhere nice, but Olive Garden was closed, so we just went to a steakhouse instead. I thought Agatha might have been bummed about the lack of breadsticks. She seemed a little downcast, so I asked her what was going on, if there was anything wrong.
When you asked Miss Lee what was wrong, what did she tell you?
It wasn't about the breadsticks, which is good, but she said, Stevie asked me for something today and I had to say no. I hope—
Objection, Your Honor. Your say.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. This statement actually falls under a portion of Rule 8033. Now, 8033 makes a specific allowance for statements of memory and facts remembered when they pertain to the terms of the will. And it's our contention that when Agatha Lee was talking to Ryan Cabrera immediately after her conversation with the plaintiff, she was referring to denying the plaintiff re-entry into her will when she said, Stevie asked me for something and I had to say no. Thus, under that last sentence of Rule 8033, this is admissible.
Plaintiff counsel, why doesn't this fall under 8033, that last clause of it?
Well, the reason it doesn't fall under that last clause is because we don't have enough evidence to support the defense's contention that this conversation was about a will. No will was mentioned. In fact, this witness says we haven't heard anything about a will from this witness at all, about ever having heard about a will. So defense counsel can't draw that link that would be necessary for this to be admissible under 8033.
All right. Defense counsel, do you have any evidence that draws that link? And I believe the case law lets me consider inadmissible evidence as well. So
yes, Your Honor. So we're making an argument here basically on the totality of the circumstances. And obviously, as with all evidentiary matters, the burden and standard here is preponderance of the evidence. So first of all, the fact that the conversation with the plaintiff was immediately before this conversation. We heard from Drew Mars that immediately after this conversation, Agatha Lee went to lunch with Ryan Cabrera. The fact throughout this trial that the only thing we've heard that Stevie Rogers asked for on August 14th was re-inclusion to that will. And there's also context within this conversation that suggested whatever Mr. Rogers was asking for was something grave indeed, if I may proffer.
Sure.
We're going to hear that Agatha Lee went on to say, I hope I made the right decision. I hope Stevie forgives me. Your Honor, that evidence as a whole makes it more likely than not that when Agatha Lee said, Stevie had asked me for something earlier today and I had to say no, Agatha Lee was talking about that will.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
yes, last time.
That conversation is highly in contention in today's trial. There is no totality of the evidence which can allow this to be entered under 8033. In fact, 8033 doesn't even mention a totality of the evidence burden or standard which the defense has to meet. Because they don't have proof, because there's no mention of a will, there's no reason this should be admitted under 8033. We don't know what was being talked about in that conversation.
I hear this plaintiff's argument that this is in contention, but I believe that the burden has been met and you're free to cross on it. So the objection is overruled.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Cabrera, what did Agatha Lee tell you?
Yeah, she said, I asked her why she was sad, and she said, Stevie asked me for something today and I had to say no. I hope Stevie will forgive me, and I hope I made the right decision.
And did you ever hear from Agatha Lee again?
No, unfortunately not. I drove her home, and then the next day, Drew Mars called me. She was sobbing through the phone, but that I found out Agatha had passed.
Thank you, sir. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Plaintiff, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Perfect. Second. I'd like to pick up right where you left off, sir,
Sure.
with that conversation.
Okay.
You actually asked Miss Lee what it was that Stevie had asked for.
That's right.
She said she didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah, she seemed like she didn't want to talk much longer.
Well, she specifically said to you that she didn't want to talk about it, right?
That's right.
And in fact, you never found out what it was that Stevie Rogers had asked for. She never told you, right?
No, Agatha said Stevie asked for something, and then the next day she died.
So that was a yes to my question, right?
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you about something else that was said later on in that conversation.
Okay.
Now, towards the end of that conversation, you asked Miss Lee if you could set up another meeting, correct?
Yeah, I wanted to interview her again that Friday. They have margaritas for $3 at Applebee's.
Right, so you asked her, are you free this Friday?
Yeah.
She said no.
Yeah, she said she had a meeting or something.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay to Agatha Lee's statements.
Which statement specifically?
No, and I guess as Ryan Cabrera went on, I have a meeting with my lawyer if Mr. Kevin Lynch intended to elicit that statement.
Plaintiff response?
Yes, Your Honor. The statement no, as well as that further statement that she had a meeting with someone else, both these fall under 8033, statements of intent, because they both express Miss Lee's intent not to meet with this witness, as well as her intent not to meet with this witness.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. To say that you have a pre-existing commitment is not a statement of intent. This isn't Agatha Lee saying, I intend to not have this meeting. This is Agatha Lee describing facts, things that are definitely happening. This is not at all a statement of intent. It doesn't fall under Rule 8033. This is inadmissible hearsay.
May I be heard?
Yes.
The statement doesn't have to include the word I intend. That intent, the fact that it is a statement of intent, is clear from the context and the nature of the statement.
All right, I'm going to overrule. It does seem to fall under intent or plan.
Yes, Your Honor.
So when you asked for that Friday meeting, and Ms. Lee said no, she had another commitment.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, she did say that. Yeah.
She said she had a meeting with her personal lawyer, correct?
Yeah, she did. I don't know what that was about.
Well, since you don't know what it was about, you don't know if she was meeting with that personal lawyer in order to change the contents of her will.
Oh, I have no idea what it was about. I can't speak to that.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about why you're here today.
Okay.
In June 2020, the defendant called you, correct?
Yeah, a couple months ago, yeah.
Right, like you said, that was just 2 months ago, right?
Yeah.
Well, when the defendant called you, she asked you to testify in this trial, right?
Yeah, she asked me if I had anything to say, and I heard some stuff with Agatha, so I said yes.
Well, that wasn't exactly what she asked. She asked if you would testify in this trial, correct?
Yeah.
You said yes.
That's right.
And then the defendant said, now, on an unrelated note, is there anything of Miss Lee's that you would like?
Yeah, she asked me that, and I asked if I could have Agatha's library. She and I had gotten close. It was nice to have a memento of her.
Sir, let's not gloss over that. I want to be very, very clear about what you asked for. You asked for Miss Lee's private book collection.
Yeah, she had some books she hadn't published yet, and I wanted to read them.
You asked for those books because you knew exactly what they were.
They were books.
Yeah, you knew they were Miss Lee's unpublished works, correct?
Yeah, yes.
And since you were writing a biography of Miss Lee, you knew that she was a famous author.
That's right, pretty famous, especially in the 60s and everything.
A famous author who only ever published one single book.
That's right.
A single book which was a worldwide hit.
Yeah, it's been translated into a lot of languages. Yeah, you're right.
A single book which sold over 65 million copies.
That sounds about right. Agatha was rolling.
You wanted those unpublished books because you realized those books could be worth a lot of money.
I don't know about that. I just wanted the books. It'd be nice to read them. I don't know how much they'd be worth.
Sir, when you asked the defendant for those books, well, the defendant told you that if she wins this trial, those books are yours.
Well, yeah, if she wins, she'll get the books, and she's gifting them to me.
That was a yes to my question. She said that if she wins this trial, those books are yours. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to read them.
Thank you, sir. I got no further questions for you.
Redirect?
None, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Cabrera, you are excused. At this point, we'll hear closing arguments from each party, and everyone should switch back to speaker view using the button in the upper right-hand corner. All right, plaintiff, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, go ahead.
Members of the jury, this case was a murder for money. Because on August 14th, the defendant realized that she could lose over $20 million in just under 24 hours. Because you see, the defendant learned that Miss Lee, she had a change of plans about her will. She was taking the defendant out. The defendant didn't know when this was going to happen. She didn't know if it was going to be later that day or the next day, so she had to act fast. Remember the jury? We learned that she went to a pharmacy. She bought chlorandramine pills. She snuck over to Miss Lee's room and left those pills in her pill organizer. Here's the jury. Miss Lee trusted the defendant. She probably never even knew what happened to her. We do. That's why we're asking you to bring justice for Miss Lee. Because this case was a murder for money. Now, as the plaintiff, we had a burden. We had to prove to you by preponderance of the evidence that the defendant killed Miss Lee. The defendant knowingly or purposefully caused Miss Lee's death. All that means is that we have to show you it's more likely than not that the defendant murdered Miss Lee. And we have. We met that burden. We showed you this case is a case of murder for money. And we did that by showing you the motive, the means, and the mistakes the defendant made. So I want to walk you through each one of those, one by one. First, the motive. Well, the defendant realized she had $20 million to lose. Miss Lee had a lot of money, and that money was going to someone. Now, the defendant was originally written into that will, but on August 14th, she learned that she was getting taken out of it. She learned that Miss Lee was planning on giving it all to Stevie Rogers. However, she had a plan. But before I get into that, I want to answer a question you might have, because we've heard a lot of contention about what really happened in that conversation. Was it Miss Lee? Was it that Ms. Lee said that Stevie Rogers wasn't going to get put back in that will? Or was it that Stevie Rogers was never going to get put in the will and was getting kicked out of it completely? And when you're asking yourself that question, members of the jury, I want you to keep in mind one fact. That right after that conversation, the defendant drove to a pharmacy where she could buy chlorandramine. The same chlorandramine pills which were probably found in her closet. And that brings us to the means, members of the jury, how the defendant carried out this crime. because every step of the way, you're going to find the defendant's footprints. First, we heard about that pharmacy. But on top of that, members of the jury, we heard about how the defendant was seen sneaking into Miss Lee's room when no one else was there, carrying something in her hand. And after that, members of the jury, well, what the evidence showed us is that she took 2 wintering pills out of Miss Lee's capsule. And then she put back in 2 chlorandramine pills. How do we know that, members of the jury? Well, not only did the defendant have the necessary knowledge to commit this crime, she knew that Miss Lee had this allergy to chlorandramine. Additionally, she knew that she should substitute those chlorandramine pills for wintering pills. She could see what both of them looked like. Not only did she have the necessary knowledge, not only did she have access to those chlorandramine pills, the defendant made crucial mistakes. Crucial mistakes which allow us to know with certainty that this case was a murder for money. Now, you might be asking yourselves, well, why were these mistakes made? And it's an interesting question. We heard about it on the cross of Mr. Bond. Well, why was it the defendant left the murder weapon in her closet for over a week? It's an interesting question, members of the jury, but there's a clear and simple answer. The defendant thought no one was onto her. And the reason we know that, members of the jury, I want you to think back to Miss Lee's will reading. At that will reading, we learned the defendant told a lie when it was announced that she would inherit everything. The defendant said that she had no idea that was happening. So I want you to ask yourselves, well, why did the defendant tell that lie? Well, why did she think she could get away with that? The answer is simple. She thought that no one was looking. So when they did look, well, she was unprepared. And what the police found were the fingerprints. The fingerprints which mark exactly how the defendant committed this crime. You see, the police found that inside Miss Lee's bottle of wintering pills, there were 2 wintering pills with Drew Marr's fingerprints on them. The jury, that's consistent with the plaintiff's case. It's consistent with the defendant sneaking into Miss Lee's room and taking out 2 wintering pills and subbing them in with chlorandramine pills. On top of that, members of the jury, the police found the chlorandramine pills. They found them in a black bag hidden in the defendant's closet. More than that, members of the jury, they found fingerprints on that black bag. Now, while most of the fingerprints around that bag had been smudged, there was one fingerprint which was not smudged on the zipper. And I want you to keep in mind, the defendant told you that maybe she bumped into that bag at some point while she was digging through her closet. Members of the jury, why would the fingerprints all be smudged then? Why would the defendant's fingerprint be on the zipper of all things? What are the odds that you're digging through a closet and you touch the zipper? Now, what that zipper tells us is the defendant was the last person who closed that bag. And when she did that, she closed this case. It means only the defendant would have known exactly what was in that black bag. Chlorandramine pills. Those were the pills which were used to murder Miss Lee. So, members of the jury, we showed you the motive, we showed you the means, we showed you the mistakes. And if you're ever wondering, which way do the facts lie? I want you to think about our burden, more likely than not, and then I want you to think about which name comes up in this trial tied to all the pieces of evidence. Because what you'll see is that it was Drew Mars who stood to lose $20 million. It was Drew Mars who made a trip to a pharmacy the day before Miss Lee died. It was Drew Mars whose fingerprints were found on the bag containing the murder weapon. This case was a case of murder for money. For Miss Lee and for the plaintiff, we're asking that you find her guilty. Thanks.
Thank you. Defense closing?
Sorry, just realized I was on mute, Your Honor.
It's okay. Take your time.
May it please the court, members of the jury, it was murder, but it wasn't Mars. On August 15th, 2018, Drew Mars found Agatha Lee dead in her bedroom at 82 years old. And the plaintiff's reaction when he found out was immediate. He didn't stand there shocked. His immediate reaction to learning his grandmother was dead was to hire a private investigator. And before that investigator arrived, he was accusing Drew Mars of murder. And if you want to know how he got there so fast, without an autopsy, a toxicology report, really any evidence, the answer is simple. The plaintiff went to sleep knowing a piece of evidence was planted behind an unlocked door, that his grandmother would be dead the next morning. The plaintiff went to sleep knowing he was on his way to being $25 million richer. And this lawsuit is the last step in the plaintiff's plan. See, the plaintiff and Mr. Lynch keep on saying this lawsuit's about justice, but it's about Agatha Lee's estate. Whether it would go to the plaintiff or Drew Mars. And we heard today Agatha Lee made her decision. She wrote it down. She signed it. And she chose Drew Mars as the beneficiary of her will. And that will is legally binding, with an exception the plaintiff admitted he's known about for years. If the plaintiff could make sure Agatha Lee died, if he could make sure a jury blamed Drew Mars for it, or the members of the jury, the will would be overturned. The plaintiff would get everything. But members of the jury, it wasn't enough today for the plaintiff to claim Drew Mars was a killer. He had to prove it. It was murder, but it wasn't Mars. Now, first, we're going to tell you why the plaintiff's story falls apart when you start asking questions about it. And then, even though we don't have a burden, we're going to explain that the killer is in this courtroom. It's just that it's the man who's been making accusations for 2 years. Now, let's start with the plaintiff's story, because when they say that Drew Mars killed Agatha Lee, you have to ask 2 questions. Why would she do that? And how would she do that? Motive and means. And let's start with motive. Because members of the jury, that's a tough sell for Mr. Lynch. You met Drew Mars today, and she isn't greedy. She wasn't hungry for more money. She was paid generously. In fact, the only evidence the plaintiff has given you of motive comes from the plaintiff himself. The plaintiff claims on the morning of August 14th, Agatha Lee told the plaintiff, "You're going to be the beneficiary of my will. I'm going to give you all of my money." Members of the jury, that's an important part of the plaintiff's story. So what does it tell you? That there is no evidence to back that up. Plaintiff's own witness, Mr. Bond, said, "I just took my client's word for it." Drew Mars heard that conversation, and she told you it was very different. That Agatha Lee said, "I love you, Stevie, but I'm not putting you back in my will." And that leaves us with the corroborating evidence, members of the jury. Think about what you heard from Ryan Cabrera, who talked to Agatha Lee right after that conversation. And Miss Lee said, "I had to say no. Stevie asked me for something. I hope Stevie forgives me." Those aren't the words of someone who just agreed to give the plaintiff $25 million to play with. The evidence doesn't paint the picture of Drew Mars as someone who was motivated to kill, because she wasn't. And then you get to the means, this question of how would Drew Mars kill Agatha Lee? And this is where the plaintiff's story really falls apart. Because to believe the plaintiff, you have to believe 2 contradictory things. You have to believe that Drew Mars is both incredibly cunning and incredibly stupid. That she was wearing gloves when she opened that bottle of chlorandamine. That's where there were no smudges or fingerprints. But then she closed the box with her bare hands. And Mr. Lynch told you he thinks he has an explanation for that. He thinks it's because no one would suspect Drew Mars. Drew Mars thought no one was onto her. But we know that's not true. From the moment the plaintiff found Agatha Lee, he was accusing Drew Mars of murder. Members of the jury, if you have to believe someone is cunning and stupid at the same time, that's a pretty good chance they're being set up. It was murder. It wasn't Mars. How do we know it's the plaintiff? Members of the jury, think about the plaintiff's financial history with Agatha Lee. We heard today that in 2008, the plaintiff was the sole beneficiary of the will and got a $2 million trust fund. What does he do for the next 10 years? He basically pretends his grandmother doesn't exist. It cuts her off. And even in February 2018, when he was disinherited from the will, you heard the plaintiff wasn't worried because he still had money in that trust fund. June of 2018, members of the jury. The plaintiff didn't want to admit it today, but that trust fund ran dry that month. And that's when the plaintiff decided, well, grandma's got money. Let me get back in her good graces. And sure enough, a month later, that's where the plaintiff was. And we agreed that on August 14th, there was a conversation about that will. But members of the jury, the balance of the evidence tells us Agatha Lee said no. And then she left the plaintiff alone. And the plaintiff knew a few things. The plaintiff knew Agatha Lee was deathly allergic to a drug he could buy over the counter. And the plaintiff knew every door was unlocked, including Drew Mars's. The plaintiff knew that if he could kill Agatha Lee, but pin it on Drew Mars, then it didn't matter what Miss Lee wanted. The will would be overturned. So that's what the plaintiff did. Planted the evidence and waited to blame Drew Mars. Members of the jury, we can't bring Agatha Lee back, but we can make sure her money goes to the person she wanted it to go to. Fine for Drew Mars. Thank you.
Plaintiff, any rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes, go ahead.
Members of the jury, defense counsel started their closing argument by accusing or by attacking both the plaintiff as well as Mr. Bond for being too quick to target, to point out that Drew Mars was the likely suspect. Members of the jury, that's because it was obvious. All the facts, all the circumstances pointed towards Drew Mars. There were two people in that building. And it was one of them that was getting taken out of that will. But there's one piece of evidence which destroys their case completely. And the defense counsel just talked about it. It was that bag. He told you about how you had to believe that the defendant made some sort of crazy mistake. That she did a lot of stupid things. She made mistakes. But something that defense counsel said really didn't quite agree with that theory. He told you that you had to believe the defendant was wearing gloves when she unzipped the bag, used the bag, and took the pills out. That's not consistent with the evidence. You just have to believe that the defendant took some effort to smudge the fingerprints on the bag, maybe try to wipe them down, and that the defendant missed a spot. And the fact of the matter is that one spot the defendant missed, it has the defendant's fingerprints on it. It's the defendant whose evidence, whose footprints, whose fingerprints can be found at each step of this crime. That's why we're asking you to find the defendant guilty of murder for money. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, all competitors. At this point, judges should complete and submit their ballots, and I'll ask everyone to stay on until they have been submitted, and I believe the bailiff will take over at this time.
Great work, folks. I'll be putting everyone into their breakout rooms.
And are we sure, do we know if the live stream has been stopped?
I'm stopping the live stream now. Judges, please finish your ballots.
I had a technical issue with the internet connection. Is it possible to just email you an Excel file?
Give me 1 second.